There is a very quiet moment that most people miss when talking about narcissists. Not the moment of the final argument, not when they grow cold, disappear, or find a new source of supply, but the moment you withdraw completely on an inner level, when you stop waiting, stop hoping, and release every remaining invisible thread. For you, that moment is not dramatic. It feels like putting your phone down after an exhausting day, like letting go of something that has long since run out of strength. But for the narcissist, this is not the end of a relationship. It is the collapse of a psychological structure. Most people believe that narcissists do not hurt, do not regret, and are not affected when you leave. They imagine the narcissist feeling relieved, celebrating their freedom, quickly replacing you with a new face. But that is only the surface. What you do not see is what unfolds inside, where there is no audience, no social media, no story to perform. Through the lens of Carl Jung, the narcissist does not live from the true self. They exist through the persona, a performed identity, and that persona can only stand when there is a living mirror reflecting their value. And in that relationship, that mirror was you, when you were still there, whether in pain, in anger, pleading, or trying to fix things. The narcissist still had control. Because your reactions, your emotions, your suffering, all of it served as fuel for their self-regulation. But the moment you are truly gone for good, no reaction, no participation in the story, the mirror disappears. Not smashed, not torn away in rage, simply no longer held by anyone. And that is when things begin to malfunction. The narcissist's collapse does not happen loudly. It does not look like an outburst or an act of revenge. It resembles a system error where old strategies no longer work. Self-justifying narratives lose their believers, and the persona, for the first time, no longer knows who it is performing for. The shadow begins to leak through. The questions they have always pushed outward now turn inward. And the most terrifying thing for the narcissist is not that you leave, but that you become irrelevant. In this video, we will explore the 7 stages of inner collapse that occur when a narcissist realizes you will never come back, not through dry theory, but through the real psychological currents unfolding within them. Not so you wait for their remorse, not so you witness their reckoning, but so you understand a liberating truth. Your silence does not destroy them, it returns you to yourself. 1. Illusion of control. In stage 1, the narcissist has not yet realized that you have left for good. Not because they are calm or strong, but because their nervous system has grown accustomed to your continued existence. You do not need to be visibly present, nor do you need to stay in frequent contact. Only a baseline belief is required that you have not truly gone. In their psychological structure, you are not registered as a person capable of withdrawing decisively, but as a possibility that is always available to return when needed. So, when you fall silent, they do not interpret it as an ending. They interpret it as a familiar pause, a temporary interruption in the old script, a slowdown that will eventually self-correct just as it has before. The narcissist's brain operates on prediction, and their default prediction is always the same. You will message first. You will soften. You will not be able to hold out for long. Your history of returning has reinforced that belief, allowing them to feel that their power remains intact. At this stage, narcissists often appear calm, sometimes even confident. They do not panic, they do not search, they do not rush to intervene. On the surface, they may seem fine, busy, even thriving. But this calm does not come from inner self-mastery. It comes from the illusion of control. In their mind, the mirror is still there. They believe you are still watching, still reacting in silence, still unable to step out of the old role. What matters most is this. At this stage, the narcissist does not yet experience loss. You have not been recognized as someone who has left with sovereignty. You are still perceived as part of their ego regulation system, a familiar variable that will soon return to restore order. Therefore, they see no need to change, no need to apologize, no need to reflect on anything. Everything in their internal logic is still on script. This apparent calm is often what hurts the empath the most. You see them seemingly unaffected and begin to question whether you ever mattered at all. But the truth is, they have not yet confronted reality. This is not the stage of collapse. This is the stage in which their psychological system still believes it has control, because in the past, that belief has never been challenged. Stage 1 truly ends only when something does not happen. You do not come back. No messages, no checking in, no reaction. When that silence lasts long enough to break their familiar prediction, the illusion of control begins to crack for the first time. The narcissist does not collapse immediately at that point. But from this moment on, a vague sensation appears in their nervous system that something has slipped out of the old orbit. And that vague sensation is the quiet starting point of the entire collapse that follows. Stage 2, when the mirror truly disappears. After the illusion of control begins to crack, the narcissist enters a state that is difficult to name. They are not panicked yet, but they are no longer as certain as before. A vague sense of emptiness emerges, not sharp enough to be called pain, but strange enough to draw the nervous system's attention. This is the first moment they realize that your silence is no longer operating by the old rules. No late message arrives. No sign of turning back. No familiar moment of weakness. And what unsettles them is not missing you, but the absence of reflection. In the narcissist's psychological structure, you were never merely a lover or a partner. You were the mirror that allowed them to feel that they existed, that they had value, that they were desired. When that mirror disappears, they do not immediately feel grief, they feel disoriented. It is like stepping into a familiar room where the lights have been turned off. Everything is still there, but nothing is illuminated. And without your gaze, the narcissist begins to lose the ability to self-regulate their ego. At this stage, they often become quietly restless. They may check their phone more often, without knowing exactly what they are waiting for. They may scroll through your social media, not necessarily out of longing, but to confirm that the mirror still exists somewhere. They search for traces of reaction. A sad status, a familiar song, an indirect line, anything that suggests you are still directing energy toward them. If they find it, they feel temporarily reassured. If they do not, the emptiness rises again. From Carl Jung's perspective, this is the moment when the persona begins to lose its foundation. The persona cannot stand on its own without an external gaze. And when that gaze disappears, the shadow does not immediately erupt, but the hollowness beneath the persona starts to show. The narcissist cannot name this feeling. They only know that something feels off, out of sync, not the same as before. It is important to emphasize this. At stage 2, the narcissist has not fallen back in love with you, nor are they truly missing you in a deep emotional sense. What they are experiencing is the loss of an external regulator. You are no longer there to help them feel stable, powerful, or desired. And without that mirror, they are forced to be alone with themselves, something they have avoided their entire life. For this reason, this stage is often disguised as busyness. They throw themselves into work, entertainment, new people, new plans. Not because they are well, but because they need to fill the space that has just opened. Yet the more they try to fill it, the more visible the emptiness becomes, because nothing can replace the feeling of being reflected by someone who was once deeply bonded to them. And from here, when the mirror does not return as expected, a very small but dangerous question begins to form in their nervous system. If they are no longer looking at me, then who am I? That question is not yet large enough to cause an immediate collapse, but it marks the transition into the next stage where your silence is no longer a pause, but a reality that can no longer be ignored. Stage 3, ego error and silent obsession. When the mirror does not return as the narcissist expects, When your silence lasts long enough that it can no longer be self-soothed as merely a temporary pause, their psychological system begins to show clearer malfunctions. This is the point at which the narcissist's predictive brain encounters an error. Throughout the relationship, that brain had been programmed through a repeated loop. They withdraw, you become anxious, they grow cold, you move closer, they go silent. You are the one who breaks the distance. Each time, their nervous system was reinforced with the belief that they still controlled the rhythm. But now, that prediction no longer holds. You do not appear to patch the gap, and a brain unaccustomed to uncertainty begins to react. At this stage, the narcissist still does not label their feelings as loss or remorse. What they experience first is confusion and irritation, a sensation that something is out of sync, as if a familiar gear in their inner machinery is no longer meshing. They begin to think about you more often, but not in a gentle way. These thoughts are colored by control rather than longing. Why haven't they reached out? What are they doing? Are they really okay? Not because they care about your emotional state, but because your silence destabilizes their central position. It is precisely at this stage that silent monitoring often appears. The narcissist may check your social media more frequently, notice small changes, and search for signs that you are still directing energy toward them. A sad post, a dark quote, a familiar song, anything can be interpreted as evidence that you have not truly left. If they see you suffering, they feel temporarily reassured. If they see you silent or worse, seemingly calm, a vague sense of unease begins to grow. At this stage, power begins to shift, even if the narcissist is not fully conscious of it. Previously, they were the one who withdrew, and you were the one who followed. Now, they stand still and begin to look back, wondering why there are no footsteps behind them anymore. The obsession that emerges here does not come from love, but from a wounded ego. Your lack of reaction forces them, for the first time, to face the possibility that you can exist without them, and that possibility is profoundly threatening to the narcissist's ego structure. The danger of stage 3 lies in how often it is misunderstood. Empaths may easily think, they're starting to miss me. In reality, the narcissist is missing your role, missing the feeling of being reflected, validated, and placed at the center. They are not yet missing you as an independent person with your own needs and emotions. They are only beginning to feel the absence of what once allowed them to experience themselves as stable and real. And it is precisely this absence that causes their mind to revolve around you more and more. Not because love has returned, but because your silence has become a wordless question they cannot control. From this moment on, the narcissist is no longer passively waiting for you to come back. They are pulled into a spiral of thought in which you are no longer the one chasing, but the blind spot that renders their entire familiar structure unstable. And that is the direct precursor to the next stage, where confusion gradually turns into inner panic. Stage 4, the collapse of the narrative. At this stage, the narcissist can no longer rely on familiar, self-soothing stories to keep their inner world stable. The narratives they once told about you, about the relationship, about the reasons for the separation, begin to lose their effect. Before, they could easily attach familiar labels to you: too needy, too emotional, too complicated, too demanding. Those labels allow them to maintain a simple order. You were the problem. They were the one trapped. But when your silence lasts long enough, when you do not react, do not argue, do not try to return, that story begins to develop gaps that can no longer be filled with their old logic. What unsettles the narcissist most at this stage is not missing you, but losing control over the narrative. Throughout the relationship, they were accustomed to defining reality. Who was right? Who was wrong? Who needed who more? But when you withdraw completely, without arguing, without justifying yourself, without trying to prove anything, they lose the audience required to sustain their performance. A story, no matter how carefully constructed, cannot survive if no one is left to participate in it. At this stage, the narcissist begins to experience a deeply uncomfortable sensation. There is no longer anyone playing the role of the problem for them to project onto. And when that role disappears, they have nowhere to offload responsibility. Their thoughts begin to fragment. There are moments when they find themselves wondering, if I was right, why didn't they come back? This question does not form clearly, but it lingers in the background of their mind, destabilizing the entire narrative structure they once relied upon. From Carl Jung's perspective, this is the moment when the persona loses its stage. The persona exists only when there is an external gaze to confirm it. When that gaze disappears, the persona does not collapse immediately, but becomes hollow, fragile, no longer strong enough to conceal what lies beneath. And it is precisely here that the shadow begins to leak through, not as awakening, but as unease, irritation, and a pervasive discomfort without a clear cause. The narcissist may respond to this stage by attempting to rewrite the story in a new direction. They may tell others that they were the one who chose to leave, that they escaped a toxic relationship, that they are finally living authentically. But these stories grow increasingly weightless, because there is no longer any behavior from you to reinforce them. You do not contradict them, but you also do not confirm them. And it is this absence of response that renders the story hollow. What matters most is this. At stage 4, the narcissist begins to feel uncertain about who they are within the story itself. They have not yet reached deep shame or guilt, but they have lost the psychological foundation that once kept everything simple. When the narrative collapses, they are left without a stable cognitive footing. And in that void, something begins to form the possibility that the problem was not entirely you. That thought remains faint and is usually pushed away the moment it arises. But the mere fact that it can surface at all reveals that the old structure is weakening. From here on, the narcissist is no longer confronting only your silence, but also the silence of the very story that once protected them. And this quiet collapse is the direct stepping stone into the next stage, where narcissistic injury becomes inevitably activated. Stage 5. The narcissistic injury is activated. When the old narrative can no longer hold, the narcissist enters the most dangerous phase for their inner structure. The narcissistic injury is triggered. This is no longer confusion or vague discomfort, but a direct strike at the core of the ego. Until this point, they could still blame you, the circumstances, or incompatibility. But when your silence lasts long enough, when you do not return, do not react, and do not give them the chance to play either the abandoned victim or the triumphant winner, all defensive mechanisms begin to lose their target. At this stage, the narcissist is forced, often only for a fleeting instant, to confront a thought they have avoided their entire life. What if I'm not enough? That thought does not arrive as a clear question, but as a sharp inner sting that is immediately pushed down. This time, however, it cannot be expelled as easily because you are no longer there to carry that feeling for them. You are no longer there to prove that they still matter, that they are needed, that they still hold power in someone's life. Narcissistic injury does not manifest as ordinary sadness. It appears as primal shame, a raw, intolerable sensation that makes them want to both hide and strike back. They may begin to recall moments when you loved them unconditionally, when you stayed despite being hurt. And those very memories become the most painful of all, because they reflect an inescapable truth. Someone truly loved them, and they themselves drove that person away. At this stage, the narcissist's inner world becomes sharply polarized. One part of them insists on total denial. I'm fine. I don't need them. Another part is pulled downward by a sense of loss that has never been named. The tension between these two parts creates a state of irritability, volatility, or, conversely, emotional numbness. They may become colder, more rigid, or suddenly seek attention elsewhere in desperate ways. Not because they have moved on, but because they cannot tolerate being alone with the wound that has just been exposed. From Carl Jung's perspective, this is the moment when the persona no longer has the strength to shield the psyche, while the shadow has not yet been integrated. Rather than awakening, the narcissist experiences inner fragmentation. They feel smaller, more fragile, but have no capacity to name or care for that part of themselves. And because they lack genuine self-reflection, they often attempt to escape this feeling through action, not through insight. What is crucial to understand is this. At stage 5, the narcissist is not in pain because they have lost you in a healthy, relational sense. They are in pain because they have lost the structure that allowed them to avoid looking at themselves. Your silence at this point is no longer just absence. It is an empty mirror, forcing them to face the void where the false self once stood. And it is precisely in that moment, when there is no one left to blame and no story left to hide behind, that the narcissistic injury is irreversibly activated. From here, the narcissist is compelled to do one of two things. Either attempt to reclaim power through action in order to soothe this wound, or retreat further into emotional freezing. And that choice leads directly into the next stage, where they either re-enter your orbit or disappear into a silence heavy with shame. Stage 6. Hoover or disappear. After the narcissistic injury is activated, the narcissist can no longer remain still in a state of shame and inner instability. Their system needs an outlet not to heal, but to soothe the pain and restore a sense of control. At this stage, they typically turn in one of two clear directions: re-engagement, hoovering, or complete withdrawal. Although these behaviors look different on the surface, they arise from the same motive: avoiding direct confrontation with the self. For narcissists who still have enough energy and still believe the mirror can be reclaimed, hoovering begins. But hoovering at this stage is rarely loud or dramatic. It is not a deep apology, nor an admission of responsibility. It appears as a safe signal, a casual message, a purposeless check-in, an emoji, a seemingly accidental appearance on your social media. The goal is not to resume the relationship, but to test whether you still react. Even a small sign that the door remains open is enough to immediately calm their nervous system. Power is restored. The pain subsides temporarily. What often causes confusion is that hoovering at this stage can feel soft, even convincing enough for an empath to believe the narcissist has realized something or feels remorse. In reality, this is not genuine vulnerability. It is a self-regulating maneuver. They are not coming to repair what was broken. They are coming to reduce the sense of deficiency threatening their ego. And if they receive the response they seek, they often withdraw shortly afterward because the objective has been met. The other path is disappearance. For narcissists whose shame is too overwhelming, whose fear of rejection is too intense, or whose self-image is too fragile, complete severance becomes the chosen option. Not because they no longer care, but because you have become a mirror that is too dangerous. Simply facing you, even through a message, can feel exposing. So they freeze, retreat, and behave as if you never existed. This is not peace. It is emotional numbness used as a means of survival. From Carl Jung's perspective, this stage reflects the failure of the persona to maintain stability and the ego's inability to integrate the shadow. Rather than maturing, the narcissist chooses action to avoid awareness. They either attempt to pull you back to patch the ego, or they disappear to avoid the truth you represent. The core point to understand is this. At stage 6, all behavior is defensive, not connective. Whether they reappear or vanish, the target is not you. It is the survival of the narcissistic structure. And if you maintain your silence, no reaction, no re-entry into the old role, Both paths ultimately lead to the same destination. The narcissist is forced to confront a new reality in which you are no longer an option, no longer a regulator, no longer a mirror that can be summoned when needed. It is at this point that the collapse process moves into its final stage, where there is no longer behavior to escape into, no narrative to cling to, and loss begins to be felt not as a power game, but as an irreversible reality. Stage 7. True internal collapse. The final stage does not arrive through a major event. There is no dramatic climax, no cinematic moment of realization, as many people imagine. It arrives quietly, when every strategy has been exhausted, when hoovering no longer works, when disappearing no longer provides safety. The narcissist enters the state they fear most, being alone with themselves, with no escape. There is no one left to pull back in, no story left to justify themselves, no behavior strong enough to numb what is happening inside, only a prolonged, undeniable emptiness. At this stage, the narcissist no longer feels powerful, nor do they feel like a victim. What emerges instead is a heavy, indistinct, but persistent sensation, irreversible loss. Not merely the loss of you as a person, but the loss of the role you once played in their inner structure, the loss of emotional regulation, the loss of the mirror that reflected their value, the loss of the belief that someone would always be there to carry the parts of them that never matured. What hurts most at this stage is that the narcissist begins to sense, without being able to name it, that this emptiness was not created by you. It was there all along. You were only the one who covered it. And when you left, the void revealed itself fully. They may look around their life at shallow relationships, fast connections, external achievements, and for the first time feel that none of it reaches the part inside that is collapsing. In stage 7, narcissists often experience a very different kind of loneliness. Not loneliness from having no one around, but existential loneliness, the sense that no one truly knows who they are, and that they themselves do not know either. They may continue living, working, and engaging socially, but underneath lies a persistent feeling of detachment, emptiness, and fatigue. There is no longer any sense of winning, nor the energy to keep playing the old power games. From Carl Jung's perspective, this is the point at which individuation should begin, where a person confronts the shadow and restructures the true self. But most narcissists do not take that path. Instead of integrating, they choose to live with a fracture, accepting a shallow, repetitive, emotional life marked by deeper avoidance. This collapse does not destroy them immediately, but it leaves them permanently less whole than before. What is most important to understand is this. Stage 7 is not the moment when they kneel and apologize, nor when they openly admit their wrongdoing. It is the moment understood only in silence, when they realize that a real connection has been lost and cannot be recreated in the old way. You are no longer an option. You are no longer a role that can be summoned back. And that impossibility is what closes the entire sequence of internal collapse. As for you, this process ended long before this point. By the time the narcissist reaches true collapse, you are no longer within their energetic field. Their collapse is not your victory, nor is it justice being revealed. It is simply the natural consequence of your withdrawal from a structure that was never built to love. And in that silence, you reclaim what they could never give you: inner sovereignty, and a life no longer paid for with yourself. After internal collapse, there is no radiant new chapter that opens for the narcissist, no light at the end of the tunnel, no instant rebirth. What remains is post-collapse life, a prolonged state in which they learn to exist alongside the emptiness they once did everything to avoid. At this stage, the narcissist no longer actively seeks you out, no longer hoovers, and no longer plays disappearance games to maintain control. Not because they have matured, but because they understand there is nothing left to reclaim in the old way. This emptiness is not loud. It does not erupt into obvious depression, nor does it always manifest as dramatic suffering. It feels more like an extended flatness, a life lacking depth, lacking genuine connection, lacking something they cannot name. They may continue other relationships, continue working, continue fulfilling social roles, but those connections are functional rather than bonded. No one reaches the inner core anymore, the part you once reached, even though they never acknowledged it. At this stage, memories of you no longer appear as an intense obsession, but as a silent benchmark. Every new relationship is compared unconsciously. No one makes them feel seen the way you once did. No one stays long enough to carry their unmatured parts. And no matter how many stories they use to rationalize it, a difficult truth remains deep within. Something has been lost permanently. From Carl Jung's perspective, this is the state of a person living disconnected from the process of individuation. The shadow remains unintegrated. The persona continues to function, but without vitality. Life goes on, but without a sense of being truly alive. Narcissists at this stage do not collapse further, but they also never return to their former false confidence. They become more guarded, more closed off, and deep inside lingers a quiet fear, the fear of real attachment, because real attachment would mean facing themselves. This entire process was never truly about how the narcissist collapses, how much they suffer, or whether they return. Those are merely the outward consequences of something far deeper. You withdrew from a structure that was never built to love, but to control, reflect, and avoid. When you truly disappear, not through anger, not through final words, but through sovereign silence, that entire system begins to destabilize, because it depended on your presence to exist. What is essential to understand is this: the narcissist does not collapse because they lose you the way one loses a healthy love. They collapse because they lose the mirror, the external regulator, the central role they once occupied in someone else's emotional life. And when that mirror does not return, is no longer summoned, no longer activated, the false self has nothing left to cling to. This is an internal collapse, quiet, not always visible, but real and enduring. But this is not a story about them. This is a story about the moment you stop carrying another person's immaturity on your back. The moment you realize that no amount of love, patience, or sacrifice can heal someone who refuses to face themselves. From Carl Jung's perspective, individuation does not begin when we find the right person. It begins when we stop losing ourselves in order to sustain a distorted bond. Your silence is not punishment. It is the final boundary. It is not meant to make them regret. It is meant to return you to your own inner axis. And when you stand firmly, they're no longer reacting, no longer waiting, no longer hoping for a different version of them. The game ends. No announcement is needed. No conclusion is required. No one has to win or lose. They may remember. They may regret. They may carry your image like a silent scar for the rest of their life. But that is no longer your concern. Because true victory was never about witnessing someone else's collapse. It was about no longer remaining in a relationship where your existence had to be paid for with yourself. And if there is one truth worth carrying after all these stages, it is a very quiet yet liberating one. When you leave in silence, you do not take anything from them. You simply take yourself back.